patchwork friends. Gosh, this is our first time doing this in the dark. This is sort of fun. So welcome back. We're delighted to see everyone, and I'm so excited to share with you why I love the half rectangle and the bias triangle so much. Now, I had a couple of posts about, I don't even know what a spiky is, so should I watch? So let me tell you that I refer to it as spikes because our good friend who is no longer with us, Doreen Speckman, referred to these two little fellows as Peaky and Spike. And so many of us who do these same elements try to honor that, and we still refer to them in some format of a spike or peak. And I'll explain that a little bit better to you as we move along. So some of the things I'm going to show you today are going to build on what we did with the good measure rulers when we were using the half square triangle and the quarter square triangle to build our flying geese. So that's a sister set, I call it. Now, tonight what I'm going to show you is the half rectangle and the bias triangle, which is another sister set in my mind. I can't determine which one of those four I love the best because I use them equally, perhaps the half square just a little bit more. But let me just show you kind of what the block looks like. So this is really just a picture of what would commonly be referred to as a spiky star. So the spiky star has the half square triangles in the corner, which we've already done, and these spike elements are what we're going to be working with today. So these two green pieces are kind of what Doreen used to call the spikes. And they do, in fact, sort of kind of look like a spike. And then the peak was this element that lives in the middle. We refer to these as half rectangles cut with the good measure half rectangle ruler. This we refer to as the bias triangle cut with the good measure bias triangle. So those are the elements we're going to be working with today. And I know we've gotten lots of comments from you folks about where you can find these tools. I encourage you to check with your local retailer because I don't really know where all they're available, but that's how you're going to find out. And you can always Google, and you can always go to our website for more information if you need to. So what I thought we'd do today is we're going to try something. Now remember, we're kind of new at this. So what we're going to be doing is trying to switch around, see if we can make this a little bit better for you. And it's going to be up to you to tell us things you liked and didn't like, or maybe it wasn't your favorite and you would have preferred something else. We're going to try to do more sewing in some of the future ones, but what we're trying to do is to get all of our technical stuff worked out so that we've got good camera, good lighting, and that sort of thing. But I am going to cut just a few elements, and then we're going to sew them, and then I'm going to come back and show you how I utilize these. So let's go to the cutting mat for me to show you the rulers and what I'm going to be doing. Now, I arbitrarily just cut a 4-inch strip of fabric. You already know from having been with me in a couple of these videos that the element that you're working with, whatever you cut it, it's going to finish a half an inch less than that. So I cut a 4 just because it was easy because my ruler is 4 inches. So it's going to finish 3.5. I don't really care what it finishes unless I'm trying to get a specific block size. So if I pull this over here and show you this, if I had cut these and they finished 3.5, my block would be 3.5, 3.5, 3.5. That's how big my block would be. But because we're not actually going to construct a block, we're just sewing the elements, and then I'm going to give you loads of choices of what you can do with these elements. I'm going to first cut the half rectangle. Now I'm hoping that you folks can see this. I pre-cut my strip 4 inches. I know it's not the easiest thing to see when we're filming like this, but all of our directions that come in the good measure packaging is very, very clear. It has first cut position and second cut position. I know it's probably a little upside down for you, so maybe y'all can try to stand on your head and see if this will work with, oh no, that wouldn't make it. the other way, would it? Well, anyway. And I did get a new blade, remember? Also pay attention to where my hand is. It's sort of holding this. Now, I'm going to just cut up the side. And I'm going to move this so you can see this a little better. There's one little notch off that corner that you have to take off. And when I start to sew, you will see why this is so important. So that would be my cut one. I would simply turn my ruler around, and it would be at 4, and I would make another set. And then, I've often wondered what would happen if somebody cut themselves while they were on camera. I suppose we'd have to call 911. Y'all would have to wait until we got all done. So now I'm going to cut my bias triangle. Now, because this has got 2 angles, I have to clean that angle up before I can make my first cut. If I wanted some white half rectangles, I'd be pretty smart, wouldn't I, to just go ahead and cut those, and they'd be ready for another project, and then I would have my angle for my tool. Now, you already know also that our rulers have little dash marks where your fabric is supposed to be positioned, so I'm going to cut 2 of these, and now what I've actually cut, let me lay these out where you can see them. So now what I'm going to do is oh dear, wouldn't that have been funny if I'd laid that out wrong? It wouldn't have been, really. Now, if you remember what we did in the flying geese, and if you don't, go back and refresh it. I sewed these 3 pieces exactly like I sewed the 3 pieces that live in the flying geese unit. So what I do is, remember I said I start at 12 o'clock, I sew down to 3 o'clock, then I go from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And you'll see that when I sew here in a second. So I would lay that down and I would run down through there. But notice that even though he's not a goose, he's got a nose. So I pretend that that nose is flying right in my mind so that I always put my top element on first. So I've got this set cut. Now I could easily, and I'm going to show you, I've pre-sewn a couple. See how I've got this little guy, which is just 2 half rectangles sewn together. Now I could also sew the bias triangles together. So as we look at some of the quilts, I'll try to reference this of how I sew it a little different. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you exactly how I would sew these. Now you already know that I've got my sewing machine set up. I've got my straight stitch throat plate, I've got my 1/4 inch foot, I've got all those things, and you already know how important I believe those are. So if I'm ready to go to my sewing machine, I'm going to now slide in, and we'll just start stitching. Now the very first thing, take a look at where that notch, see that little notch I told you that I cut off? I'm going to go up to my needle. My needle is in the down position, and I really prefer that when I sew. And if you look at the back, the little tail end, there'll also be a little flat spot there. I'm going to sew 2 of these so you can see a little bit clearer. Now I'm putting the top on the second bias triangle. And I'm going to do these a little sloppy because we're just using these as samples so that you can see the method of how I sew. Now I'm going to I like to reach back, cut one off, and I open it up. And right here, watch when I put the second one on. See that little V there? I've got a little V that just straddles that needle. And that's exactly how, and then I'm going to, look like I might have cut that one a little short. I'm going to just kind of make that little fellow fit. Now I'm going to reach back and get my second one. And you know what, even though my sewing machine doesn't need me to have that little feeder strip in there, I just sort of like it. Got those 2 little notches, have got to be on top of each other perfectly. Go to the needle, straddle the needle. I'm at my 1/4 inch on the right-hand side, and look how slick that is. Now this is where the stiletto comes in handy if you feel you like it. We talked about this before. I like it just because even though my machine is pretty good at it. Now here, take a look at two half rectangles. You got a notch to a little bit of a tail, and that sort of gives me a whole different element. So as we start to work, and I show you some of the quilts, you'll see why that's a pretty clever little element. Now, if we come back to the table, you're going to see that I have sewn. Now, I've got these guys. I'm going to kind of pull these out of the way, and I'm going to show. Y'all probably already figured out I didn't have a sewing machine set in here, didn't you? Yeah. And I can't see the questions, but I have somebody who can. So there's like a big old question that you're just pondering. Pitch it out, and we'll see whether we can answer. Now, here's what we just sewed. And then here is our little half rectangle. Now, what I want to try to get across to you is the size of the strip you cut only means that's what size that block's going to finish, depending on the number of elements that live in it. So do you see how I could make myself a whole new quilt here? See, I could put a half rectangle in here. Now, I'd have to put a square there because I'd have to have something that lined up with it. But this was just a little exercise to show you how you could sew it. And, of course, I could do it with red half rectangles and white triangles. The one thing I do when this comes from the machine is I like to get any little ear that's hanging on there. I just think it's a little bit easier. Now, you guys know how much I love my Laura Star iron and I press a lot. But right here, I finger press because all this bias in here, I have just decided it makes my life a little bit easier. So now let's look at that little block I showed you first. See, here is this unit. So do you see how easy that would be for me to create? Now, I just grabbed some triangles that we had sewn previously and take a peek at that. So if I wanted to make my own block, look how easy this would be. I could put a 4-patch in that corner. I could put a half square triangle. I could put a big square. There's loads of things that you could do. So what I would encourage you to do if you're working with your good measure half square triangle and your quarter square triangle and your good measure half rectangle and bias triangle, why not just make some elements and play with the block so that you get your 1/4 inch a little bit tighter and you understand what they're supposed to do. So this sort of gives you an idea of how I would build what is commonly referred to as the Spiky Star. Now I'm going to lay one other one. I have a little one here. Take a look at this little fellow. Oh gosh, that'll give you a headache, one with those little stripes. But see, this is sort of the exact same thing, a true tic-tac-toe board, and I've just got 4 squares in the corner and 1 square in the middle. So 5 squares and 4 of your 3-piece units would yield this block. And if I put that block on point, I can make a quilt pretty flippin' quick. So let's kind of slide this out of the way and let me show you some really fun quilts that we've used these elements in. And we're going to try to see if we can do all of this where you can see this. Now, I'm not, most of these or some of these do not have patterns and some do. But if you look right here in this corner, you see a half square triangle. And this is kind of muddy to see because it's the same unit. It's the same thing that we just got through sewing. Let me lay one down. It's this. See, it's that exact same element we sewed, and there is 4 half square triangles. Now, obviously, if this guy's 4 inches, these guys have to be 2 inches because there's 2 of them fitting one of these. So look how easy it would be for me to do my math now that you already know how to use these 4 rulers. So this would be one way, and if you look right here, let me pull this up a little bit where you can see it. This is the same thing, but this is where 2 of them are sewn together and they have one color on one side and one color on the other side. and that creates an entirely different looking element. So do you see again why I think this is kind of fun? And it does have a little embroidery design in the center, which is fun to play with. So and that's something I did eons ago. Now this little pattern is one of my favorites. This is in a little book called Christmas with K, which, isn't that a clever title? And it's also very timely since Christmas is day after tomorrow. And if you look at this, it's kind of hard to see, but right in here are 3 of the bias triangles, 2 white ones and 1 blue one. And then these guys started their life out as that, but there's a little bit of trickery that falls in there. That's in the pattern, which is also the half square and the quarter square triangle. So that is in the Christmas with K book. And then let's look at another one that also lives in the Christmas with K book. And take a look at this little tiny unit right here. That strip was only cut 2.5 inches. So those little fellas are 2.5, 2 finished. And there's our bias triangle, and there's our little half rectangles. This has got quite a few other techniques in it, and the book has got loads of good patterns. And you do need, if you buy any of those books that have the Brewer imprint on it, because remember, Brewer's the company that owns the tools, you will need the half rectangle, bias triangle, and the half square triangle and the quarter square triangle. Not all 4 for all patterns, but make sure you take a look at that. Now this is the exact thing that I just got through sewing, except it's got a square and a square in the center, and then it's got 4 half square triangles. Now a little bit of history here. This is the exact block that was on one of the ballroom floors on the Titanic. So if you're a history buff, you might go, gosh, I'm going to make one of those. And your first question to me is, how big do I cut my strips? It's a tic-tac-toe board. How big do you want each one of these squares to be? If you want them to be 4 inches, cut your strip 4.5. If you want them to be 3 inches, cut your strip 3.5. Everything, the ruler does all the work for you. That's one of the joys of owning this brand, is the rulers is where all the technique is built in. All you have to do is look at the block and decide what size you want it to be. Now I'm going to see if you can look in here. I'm going to see if I can show you a couple of patterns. We're going to look right here. Well, yes, do let us know. Are you guys posting? You see, I remember when I told y'all, I'm just doing one thing. I can't read and see what's going on, who's got a question. But I guarantee you I've been real diligent in trying to get in there afterwards and answer all of your questions. And if I didn't, please repost or do it on Kayla Publications, and we'll make sure we get it answered. So what this is where these elements are sewn together, and it creates this. So I get this spiky look like this, and it kind of looks like a little zigzaggy pattern, and that's on one of the Krista McAuliffe pattern. And that is another really fun way. I can do lots of great borders with this. Now, let's take a look at the quilt that's behind me, because this is the Star of Hope pattern, which is really one of the first quilts that I did with these 4 rulers. I used the good measure half square, quarter square, good measure half rectangle, bias triangle. And I'm going to go to the wall and kind of show you this little star right here is what we built. We could make last week with our flying geese units. All this little spiky stuff that runs around this outside is either, it starts and stops with a half rectangle, and all of this stuff built in the middle is a bias triangle. I'm telling you that I get carried away on these a lot, and I mean, I kind of run in cycles where I work with a lot of half squares, or I work with a lot of 9 patches, and then, or plates or whatever, and then I move on. But the spikes have kept me busy now for quite a while, and I would say over the last few years, I've made 30 or 40 quilts that pretty much are made up with this element. Storm at Sea is a block that if you take a look at Storm at Sea in one of your library or books, you'll see that it's got that same element in it, and it kind of looks wavy. You almost get seasick when you look at these and the motion in them. And we'll try to post some of those pictures maybe after we get off of this live. So we wanted it to be kind of short and sweet for you. What our goal is to hear from you, things you'd like. Now, boy, we've got somebody wants us to go to the barn and do something. So I don't know, if you've been looking at my Facebook page, you know I'm at the barn way more than I should be anyhow. Oh, was I supposed to show them a star pattern? See? Well, yeah, let's do. Look how pretty that is. Oh, and I'm going to snag while I'll go off camera and he'll yell at me, but I will anyhow. I'm working on one, and look at this coloring. See, it's the same thing as the one behind me, but it's a little bit cleaner in coloring, so it's so much easier for you to see it. Now, I've only made 9 blocks. That may be all I ever make. But anyway, it may just be a tablecloth cover at this point. And I do that. I tend to get carried away with these, and then I don't always finish them. So you see the Christmas with Kate pattern up, and then you saw the Star of Hope pattern up. And we want you to know, because a lot of the people have said, can I get that pattern? Where could I get it? So we are telling you, but remember, when I told you, we encourage you to go to your local retailer to see if they carry these, and if not, you just tell them they need to, because that you need it. And other than that, are there any burning questions out there, Brian? Is anybody like, ooh, goody, we like nice comments. And we've got a couple of really fun things planned coming up, and we thought we'd try an evening, because I know a lot of you work and it's kind of tough for you to get on a live, and this might be more fun for you to join us on a live. So look for it. Who knows when we'll show up. We're just going to do whatever we can, but hopefully you've enjoyed it. We'll look forward to seeing you on another Facebook Live. And it's too dark to go to the barn, but I need to go eat dinner now. So you guys have a lovely evening, and we'll see you down the pike with another video. Bye-bye.